Okay, what do you understand by the concept of world? Is it what we have around us, the physical world? Now, when the Buddha uses the word world, he is referring to the world of formations, Sankhara Loka, which means the world of experience, the world which we experience through the six sense bases. He is not concerned about what is reported in the mundane world. Mundane world outside we have no control of. We understand ourselves first. We understand the entirety of experience in our samsaric connection. Okay, and we will know that it's actually through the six sense bases. So now, brothers and sisters, I welcome you now all to the world of the six sense bases. The eyes and what bhikkhus is the all. The eyes and forms, the ear and sounds, the nose and odors, the tongue and taste, the body and tactile objects, the mind and mental phenomena. This is called the all. So now we know, number one, the Buddha referred to these six sense bases as the all. It is craving which brings renewal of being, is accompanied by delight and lust, and delights in this and that. That is, craving for sensual pleasures, craving for being, and craving for non-being. So, in the second noble truth, the Buddha did not just tell us that craving, that tanha, is the cause of dukkha. What we have here are not just three aspects of craving, but three different ways of contemplating craving. And because this refers to the craving to gain sense gratification, we can contemplate the six sense bases as factors of sense experience to understand craving and its relationship to dukkha, the suffering, and the ego identification. And we do that by using the Chachakka Sutta, also known as the six sets of six. Now, this middle length discourse is the most comprehensive one on the six sense basis and has 8 sections altogether. Synopsis, enumeration, demonstration of not self, the origination of identity, the cessation of identity, the underlying tendencies, the abandonment of the underlying tendencies, and liberation. This discourse was targeted at monks who actually attained arahantship as a result. So you know this sutta is very profound. And you can infer from this that they were not beginners in the practice. So this sutta is packed at an advanced level of instructions, which were easily understood by practicing monks. For lay people like us, this sutta may come across as dry, boring, and repetitive. What we will do tonight is to help you appreciate it more by giving you a broader and a deeper understanding of each of the 8 sections and explain how they tie in with all the core teachings of the Buddha. Okay? Thus have I heard, on one occasion, the Blessed One was living at Savatthi in Jeta's Grove, Anatta Pindika's park. Thus have I heard is usually found at the start of a sutta. Ananda recited it this way at the first Buddhist council as a personal testimony to what the Buddha said. Jeta's Grove, or Jetavana Monastery, was donated by the wealthy Anatta Pindika, right, to the Buddha. And the Buddha spent 19 out of 45 rain retreats there. And this was where he gave the majority of the discourses. And here on the slide, you can see Savatthi, which was the capital town of Kosala and ruled by King Pasenadi. This place was very, very happening during the Buddha's time. Okay, it not only housed Jeta's Grove, but also a lot of temples and shrines of other religious sects. There he addressed the bhikkhus thus. Bhikkhus, Venerable Sir, they replied, the Blessed One said this. Bhikkhus, I shall teach you the Dhamma that is good in the beginning, good in the middle, and good in the end. With the right meaning and phrasing, I shall reveal a holy life that is utterly perfect and pure. That is the 6 sets of 6. Listen and attend closely to what I shall say. This means to listen mindfully. Don't judge without any inner commentary. The mind needs to be very pliable, not rigid, soft, receptive, and in the present moment. This means that when the Buddha was delivering the discourse, the monks were most likely in Samadhi. Okay? With this synopsis, let us now move on to the next section of enumeration. Right? So, the section of enumeration is where the Buddha lists them down one by one. 6 items in 6 categories, and they are the 6 sets of 6. 6 internal bases, 6 external bases, 6 classes of consciousness, 6 classes of contact, 6 classes of feeling, and 6 classes of craving. And all these should be understood. Let's go on to the 6 internal bases, and what are they? The 6 internal bases should be understood. So it was said. And with reference to what was this said? There are the eye base, the ear base, the nose base, the tongue base, the body base, and the mind base. Here, we are not referring to the sense organs themselves, but more specifically to the functional part found within the sense organs. For example, the eye. Now, the eye base means the sensitive part of the retina that registers light, color, form, etc. In the suttas, it is usually referred to as the sense base or sense faculty. For example, if it is the eye, this sensitivity serves as a door for the eye consciousness to register what you're seeing, right? So without a functioning eye, right, no retina, there's no sight. That is why the internal bases are also referred to as the sense doors. So it was with reference to these that it was said, the 6 internal bases should be understood. This is the first set of 6. Now, the function of these internal bases, right? Here you see all 6. They are to pick up the object from the contact. For example, the eye is like a camera. It receives the ray of light, a sense faculty. The ear is like a tape recorder, recording sound, right? So without the faculty, the 2 faculties there, it will not be any sight or sound, okay? It's like an instrument. Now let's go to external bases. Also should be understood. What does this mean? They are the form base, the sound base, the odor base, the flavor base, the tangible base, and the mind object base. So it was with reference to this that it was said the 6 external bases should be understood. Now, this is the second set of 6. Sense objects, right? The visible form. When you see something, what's the object you see? It's a visible form. Your nose smells. Correct? You hear sound. Taste is the flavor. All right? Tangibility here, all right, means hard or soft, hot or cold, the pressure, and then you have mental objects. All right? This is the external. Then comes the 6 classes of consciousness should be understood. Dependent on the eye and forms, eye consciousness arises. Dependent on the ear and sounds, ear consciousness arises. And dependent on the nose and odors, nose consciousness arises. You need, for example, the eyes. You need to be aware of what you see with your eyes. You need to be aware of what you hear with your ears. The background noise is just the background. When you're engrossed with your work, you do not hear these noises. So no ear consciousness picking up the sound. Dead people do not have sense consciousness, so no awareness. Got it? Similarly, depending on the tongue and flavors, tongue consciousness arises. And dependent on the body and tangibles, body consciousness arises. Same for mind and mind objects. Okay? So it was with reference to these that it was said the 6 classes of consciousness should be understood. So this is the third set of 6. This is the summary, right? So far 3, yeah? We covered 3 sets. So this consciousness of Vinaya is the bare awareness through the 5 senses and the mind. Okay? So let's move on to next. The 4th set is the 6 classes of contact. Dependent on the I and the forms, I consciousness arises. The meeting of the 3 is eye contact. Okay? Dependent on the ear and the sounds, ear consciousness arises. The meeting of the 3 is ear contact. Okay? You can see, right? This is how the world become present to us, is it not? The form, the instrument, the faculty, and the consciousness. Dependent on the nose and odors, nose consciousness arises. The meeting of the 3 is nose contact. Similarly, we have the tongue contact. And then moving on to dependent on body and tangibles, body consciousness arises, and the meeting of the 3 is body contact. Lastly, we have the mind contact, right? The meeting of all 3 gives you contact. So this is the 4th set of 6. So it was with reference to this that it was said the 6 classes of contact should be understood. And here is the summary. All 4 classes presented in one slide. Okay? So again, in a nutshell, contact forms when you have the meeting of the sense door, sense object, and sense consciousness. So with the eye contact, sight or seeing occurs. To see with the eyes therefore means, in more precise terms, to see an object with the eye consciousness using the eye faculty as an instrument. Okay, everybody clear? Then comes what? When you see something, what will happen? You will have a feeling, right? Okay, depending on very much what's your perception. Some people feel differently when looking at Porsche. Some look at flowers will feel differently. So there will be a response. So the next set would be the feeling. Dependent on the eye and the forms, eye consciousness arises. With the meeting of the 3, there is eye contact. With eye contact as condition, there is eye feeling. Depending on the ear and the sounds, ear consciousness arises. With the meeting of the 3, there is ear contact. With ear contact as condition, there is ear feeling. Okay, then the sutta moves on and the same thing happens. What happens when there is contact? There's a response, you have nose feeling. All right, once there's contact, you will have tongue feeling. Okay, similarly, once you have contact as condition, you have body feeling. And then with mind contact as a condition, there is mind feeling. So it was with reference to these that it was said, the 6 classes of feeling should be understood. This is the 5th set of 6. Now, you will notice that the Buddha keeps repeating these phrases. This is how they should be understood. Because we do not usually regard our sense doors, our sense door processes in this way. Because the sense of I is very strong. We do not see that we are made up of nama and rupa, mind and body. Right? We think that there is a soul. We do not appreciate that it is not the I that is seeing, but the mind that sees. Right? So we need to understand the process, the reality, the Dharma, to fully appreciate, okay, how craving arises, and also helps in the realization of non-self. Okay, we'll touch on that later. This is, again, table form, the 6 classes of feelings presented this way. Now, feeling or Vedana includes both the physical sensations and the mental emotions. Now, the Buddha said that innumerable feelings arise in the body just as all kinds of wind blow in different directions in the atmosphere. We are hardly aware of these feelings because we do not pay attention to them. We usually only pay attention to feelings important to us. We will explore feelings in more detail later on. The last set of 6 is what? Craving. Okay. Dependent on the I and forms, I consciousness arises. The meeting of the 3 is eye contact. With eye contact as condition, there is I feeling. With I feeling as condition, there is I craving. Okay. Depending on the ear and sounds, ear consciousness arises. The meeting of the 3 is ear contact. With ear contact as condition, there is ear feeling. With ear feeling as condition, there is ear craving. Craving is bhava tanha, and with bhava tanha, you can hear something you like, you want to hear some more. When you hear terrible noises that you don't like, the craving to, you have aversion, that to run away from it, okay? And the next slide will show, similarly, nose craving, dependent on nose feelings. Moving on, similarly, with tongue craving. Okay, first you have contact, then feeling, and then craving. Then we have the body consciousness giving rise to body contact, body feeling, and body craving. And we have contact because you have the form, right? And the sense base. Lastly, we have mind consciousness. Then we have contact because of the mind door. And then, of course, it gives rise to mind feeling and mind craving. So it was with reference to these that it was said the 6 classes of craving should be understood. This is the 6th set of 6. Here goes. Now, in this section on enumeration, right, cause and effect is very clearly demonstrated in this chain of events that makes up the 6 sets of 6, with each arising dependent on causes and conditions, right? Now, the Buddha did not invent this law. It is a law of nature that has always been in existence. What it means, depending on causes and conditions, is like when this exists, that comes to be. With the rising of this, that arise. When this does not exist, that does not come to be. So there's no independent arising. For example, for a tree to grow, you need the seed, which is the cause. And the conditions for growth are sunlight, water, and good soil. So even for evaporation to occur, you need the condition, which is the heat. And the cause is the water. So now you just can't say, like, understanding how craving arises, you can't say that, oh, I can't help myself, I buy something, I crave for something because the object is so good, because of the packaging, because the clothes is so nice, the watch is just so one of a kind, I can't help it. Now you know, right, that how does craving arise? Just know the next time you go shopping, it's not the dress or the watch that's causing the craving. Understand that craving comes from within you. Okay? Now let's move on to the demonstration of not self. Today I can only cover 4 parts up to the origination of identity. If anyone says the I is self, that is not acceptable. The rise and fall of the I is seen and understood. And since its rise and fall are discerned, it would follow myself rises and falls. That is why it is not acceptable for anyone to say the I is self. Thus, the I is not self. Okay? The rising and falling phenomenon appears to us in the form, right, we refer to as change. Okay, let's look at the I base, the first set of 6. Our internal I base changes constantly, right? And these changes are obvious to all us at different levels. Most of us are born with eyes that are healthy and in tip-top condition, but they do not always stay this way. Both the physical eye and the eye faculty deteriorate as we get older, and it stops functioning altogether when we die. Even on a daily basis, our eye faculty functions optimally in the morning because we are recharged after a good night's sleep. But at the end of the day, our eyesight is not as good because of constant use. Throughout the day, our eyesight also fluctuates. So the internal eye base rises and falls from birth to death, from day to day, and even from moment to moment. When something is subject to change, it cannot be permanent. We do not have full control over this deterioration, and as such, we do not own it. And when it is not permanent, it cannot be self, correct? This will be clearer when we go into the subject of self later on. Okay. Similarly, if anyone says I forms are self, that is not acceptable. The rise and fall of forms are seen and understood. And since the rise and fall are discerned, it would follow myself rises and falls. That is why it is not acceptable for anyone to say I forms are self. Okay? Thus, the I is not self, forms are not self. Forms also rise and fall. We all know that an atom is not fixed. It's not a stable matter, as the electron, the neutron, and the proton are always in a state of flux. This means that all forms are ever-changing. Even a car can deteriorate, but it's just a change is not apparent to us so fast. And again, when something is subject to change, it cannot be permanent. And when it is not permanent, it cannot be self. You do not own the sense objects. Okay, it's quite easy to understand this. It's external. You don't own it. Similarly, for eye consciousness. Eye consciousness arises dependent on the eye faculty and the eye object. So if these two are subject to change, impermanent, and therefore not self, how can eye consciousness be self? Because it's dependent on form and the faculty. You don't have full control. Similarly, the same reasoning applies to eye contact, which does not arise on its own. It is dependent on causes and conditions. Similarly, eye feeling is not self. Depending on whether the sense object captures your attention and depending on whether your eye faculty catches it, the object, how far, how close, whether you have astig or whether you wear your spectacles, etc., etc. Again, depending on causes and conditions, and therefore cannot be regarded as self. I craving is not self. The sutta goes on to repeat the same thing for the other 5 sets, which I will show you very quickly. Yeah, right. The ear is not self. Sounds are not self. Ear consciousness is not self. Ear contact is not self. Ear feeling is not self. Ear craving is not self. Similarly, the example of the nose. The odors, the nose consciousness, the nose contact, feeling and craving cannot regard as self. Right? The moment you feel you own all this, it becomes very personal. Same thing for the tongue. Flavors, tongue consciousness, tongue contact, tongue feeling, tongue craving, again, not self. Okay? This is vipassana. Body is not self. Tangibles are not self. Body consciousness is not self. Body contact is not self. Body feeling is not self. Body craving is not self. Okay? Body anicca. While talking to you guys, we're all aging at the same time. All right? People don't want to get sick, they get sick. They don't want to get fat, they get fat. All right? We don't have full control over this body. Cannot regard it as self, something permanent. Mind is also not self. Mind objects, mind consciousness, mind contact, mind feeling, and mind craving. In summary, everything arises, exists, and then fades away. This is a factor of impermanence, anicca. All right? Anicca is the first of the 3 universal characteristics that govern all conditioned phenomena. The other 2 are dukkha and anatta, unsatisfactoriness and not self. Of these 3 universal characteristics, right, anicca is the easiest one to see and understand. And the Buddha always used the concept of anicca to help people understand not self. We are just mind and body. This body made up of the 4 elements of earth, water, heat, and wind, it changes every minute. All right? We are aging every minute. We have no full control. Not self. Mind is also the same. Nothing changes faster than the mind, right? Depending on causes and conditions. Feelings influenced by perception and vice versa, which influence mental formation, the sankhara. Sokhun, can you read the next slide for me?
Sure. Feeding the Buddha and the Sangha is more meritorious than feeding the Buddha alone. It is even more meritorious to construct a monastery for the general use of the Sangha of the 4 quarters of all times. Taking refuge in the Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha is better still. Abiding by the 5 precepts is even more valuable. But better still is the cultivation of metta, loving kindness. And best of all, the perception of impermanence just for the time of a finger snap.
In fact, the Velama Sutta tells us that of all things that we can achieve in our dharana practice, the best is to see impermanence. When we have the insight or perception of impermanence, we do not hold things too tight. We do not have these unrealistic expectations of wanting to always be in full control. We see reality for what it is. We know how to let go. And we know we are on the right track towards realization of not self, whether in this life or the next life. But at the very minimum, we need to see anicca. Okay? Now, before we go on to the next section, let us look closely at this concept of self. When I keep saying not self, what does it mean? All right? We have to know what this self means before we can truly understand not self. There are basically 2 formulations of self. The first type of self is one that is in contact with the external world through what? Perceptions. It is a self that remembers, evaluates, plans, and in other ways, responsive to and acts in the surrounding physical and social world. So this self plays a very important role, right? In self-comparison, self-control, self-esteem, self-fulfillment, self-image, blah, 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 self-identity. It's called personality view. I am this or that. And that ego attaches to how you view yourself and this world. Then there's also this definition of self. It's a metaphysical view where the self represents an essence, a life force, or a spiritual core of a person, usually referred to as the soul. Now, people who subscribe to the idea of soul, as in most religions, see it as something permanent, immutable, means not subject to change, eternal, exists without interruptions, is endless, and existing independently, not subject to causes and conditions. In fact, a lot of TV drama, serials perpetuate this false belief. No, they will show lovers from one lifetime to another lifetime looking exactly the same. The characters almost the same. Nothing much has changed. Because it's a very romantic depiction of love, this eternal love that transcends lifetimes. Okay, not self is the opposite of these four qualities. And if you have gone into Samadhi, you will see mind and body and realize that's really not a soul. Okay. Not self is impermanent. Everything rises, exists, and then falls away. Okay. I'm really giving you the example of this body. Whether it stays healthy or not is dependent on your diet and lifestyle, depending on causes and conditions. It's not immutable because it is ever changing. Correct? And what is impermanent and subject to change cannot be eternal, right? And it does not exist independently because all conditioned things are subject to causes and conditions. In fact, brothers and sisters, you just need to prove one quality to be untrue, and the whole concept of self cannot hold water, right? And of course, as I said earlier, if you go to Samadhi, you will see that you are just mind and body. And when you're in Samadhi and you are doing Vipassana, you can see the mind runs from one sense door to another. And then you will see that, realize that's really no soul. Okay. Next, we go on to the last part of today is the origination of identity. How did we come to have this ego? In this section, we will see that the mind and body are impermanent, subject to change, not internal, all right, and exist according to causes and conditions. There's no soul, no essence to speak of. Now we know that the 6 sets of 6 are not self. But if they are not self, how did this idea of the person and identity, how did this idea of a self originate? Let's go on. Now, because this is the way leading to the origination of identity. Okay? We regard this as mine, this I am, this is myself. We regard all 6 sets of 6 as mine, I, and self. Similarly, for the ear, odors, ear consciousness, ear contact, ear feeling, ear craving, this is mine, this is I am, this is myself. Similarly, for the nose, flavors, nose consciousness, contact, feeling, and craving. We we own it. Similarly, for tongue, flavors, consciousness, contact, feeling, craving. We own it. So for tongue, you own the pleasant experience and you start to chase for it. Hold on to that craving that lead many people to make very unwise decisions on food. Not seeing that craving is just a mental reaction that comes from past pleasant experience. Your body really doesn't need unhealthy food because you own that 6 sets of 6. See it as mine, I am, and self. Similarly for body, take all these sense experience personally, a touch and a sensation. That is all there is to it. Nothing to be so personal about it. Similarly for the mind. If you are fixated on views and own the views, goodness, right? You suffer when your views are rejected or challenged because you take the rejection very personally. Countries go to war because they have different views. Again, the next slide comes up. This is a summary.
This is mine, this is I am, this is myself. One regards the internal sense space as this is mine, this is I am, this is myself. One regards external sense space as this is mine, this is I am, this is myself. One regards consciousness as this is mine, this is I am, this is myself.
Okay, you all got the drift, right? I think everybody gets the drift. Okay, so this is a summary covering all 6 sets of 6. You can see the recurring theme here. Right? The recurring theme is this is mine. All right, this I am, and this is myself. Let's explain what is this is mine. Mine means it's the easiest to relate to. It relates to possessions, persons or things that we are attached to, including our bodies. Okay. When you regard something as mine, you realize there's dukkha. When someone cut a tree outside your house, you cannot even be bothered. But if someone cuts the leaves or a branch off your tree in your garden accidentally, you will get upset because it is personal, even though you don't give 2 hoots about this tree in your garden. Okay, so this selfish attachment to material things is the most cause of our defilements, but also the easiest to let go. That's why the Buddha taught about dana, the act of giving, as the first thing to do in this gradual training scheme. When we give, we practice generosity, we separate ourselves from our possessions upon the belief that this is mine. Apart from material possessions, we also see feelings, perceptions, mental formations, and consciousness as mine. These are very much more difficult to let go. So learn to meditate. Then what does I means? So I moves in to make a material possession or mental factor not just mine, but it becomes a part of our identity. This idea of this I am stems from what? It stems from the conceit, right? Not just a more favorable regard of ourselves relative to others, but also the opinion that I am equal or I am worse. Because of this identity, a lot of people try to do great things, right? So they leave behind a good name for themselves, a good reputation that garners lots of admiration and respect. Is that enough? No, apparently. What is the point of doing great things, scheming, and living a very stressful life to chase for that greatness when you are not around after death to bask in all the glory? So we want that I, all right, that will go beyond this life. That's why we conceive the wonderful world of self. Self that continues from existence to existence, which lasts forever and ever and never ends. This is why people gravitate, right, towards doctrines and beliefs when the mind and the body are but treated as something driven by a soul or an essence that can live beyond this life. So you have a mind that stems from craving, an I that stems from conceit, and a self that comes from wrong view. Dhamma books explain the mind, I, and self this way to make it easier to understand. But they are different aspects of the same thing. What we normally refer to as that ego, that soul or personality. Okay. Let's take a look at how mind, I, and self play in a part of the first set of 6, using the I as an example. So the mind shows possession, right? This I am a part of identity. For example, I have big brown eyes. That I is self means this is the view that the eyes are part of the makeup of self, because self is not complete without sight. Form is mine, means possession. I own this body, a lot of attachment to this body. Form is I. Most people let forms shape their identity, and to view these forms, especially what they have, as part of what makes them unique. An I like no other in the whole wide world. Consciously or unconsciously, you let these forms define who you are and what you are. For example, the size of the house you live in, the type of the car you drive, the clothes you wear, the friends you keep, the books and the movies you like. Your spouse is also part of your identity. Hence, the term, my better half. And the self, the contributions to form of to the personality view of self is obvious because they affect self-image, right? Self-esteem and self-fulfillment, etc. This indirectly affects the spiritual view of self. If self is perceived as eternal and permanent, the self that is influenced and defined by form now will likely be the same self that will move on from one existence to existence, correct? So the rest actually follows the same pattern, right? We have the I consciousness, the eye contact, the I feeling, and the I craving. The same principle applies to the other 5 sets of 6. Actually, as we move from mind to I to self, the reality of it gets more and more flimsy, weaker, more difficult to substantiate. But you notice that the things that are difficult to hold on to are those we cling to the most. So the concept of self, especially the spiritual aspect of it, becomes very real simply because we want to believe in it. So we cling to the idea that it's real, come hell or high water. That's why it's so difficult to let go, right? Now, I've covered 1 to 4. Next week, I'll continue with 5 to 8. All right. Next week will be very interesting because we're going to talk about the cessation of identity.